October 31st, 1930. A lantern sways in a farmhouse window as children sneak across a field. Not to trick or treat, but to raid a chicken coop for food. Their feet crunch frosted leaves. Their eyes scan for police. This Halloween is about getting by any means. Why did towns across America suddenly start dreading Halloween? In 1933, Halloween wasn't a night of make-believe. It was a national crisis. By the early 1930s, Halloween was no longer innocent fun. It had become a night of anarchy. In many cities, it was more feared than enjoyed. Known as Black Halloween, in newspapers across the Midwest, October 31st, 1933, saw one of the largest waves of juvenile vandalism in American history. In Chicago, gangs of teens unscrewed fire hydrants, flooding entire intersections. In Detroit, pranksters greased trolley tracks, causing major crashes. In St. Louis, store windows were shattered by children hurling rocks because they didn't get an apple. Local jails filled with young offenders. The New York Times called it a night of unchecked mayhem. But what caused this shift? The answer lies in the economic freefall of the Great Depression. By 1933, 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Fathers stood on corners begging for odd jobs, while children wore shoes lined with cardboard. Anger simmered beneath the surface, especially among youth who felt abandoned by a society that had no work, no food, and no future for them. And so, Halloween became an outlet. When you have nothing to lose, what's the harm in tipping over an outhouse or smashing a storefront? Adults tolerated it at first. They called it boys letting off steam. But when entire train cars were derailed by pranksters in Pennsylvania, and mayors had their homes egged, something had to change. Halloween had become dangerous. The country was desperate for a safer way to celebrate, and that would lead to one of the most unexpected inventions of the 1930s. How a candy shortage accidentally invented haunted houses. In a decade where sugar was rationed and spirits were low, fear became the sweetest distraction. By 1933, Halloween had become a public safety problem. Windows were shattered, streetcars were derailed. And in Omaha, a group of teens placed grease on trolley tracks, causing a multi-car collision that hospitalized passengers. That same year, dubbed Black Halloween, police departments nationwide were stretched thin. But out of this chaos came something radical. For the first time in U.S. history, adults decided to entertain the children. Not with candy, they couldn't afford it, but with fear. That autumn, civic groups, school boards, and women's clubs scrambled to reclaim the night. In Kansas City, churches converted their basements into makeshift haunted mazes, using nothing but sheets, mirrors, string, and volunteers dressed in tattered rags. In Chicago, the West Side Improvement Association launched the first official haunted house, dimly lit with kerosene lanterns and filled with homemade props, like hanging skeletons made from broomsticks and flour paste. In Portland, Oregon, a local fraternal order constructed a haunted trail in the woods, using fish guts, bloody aprons, and animal bones from a butcher shop. The kids were terrified and thrilled. Even the federal government quietly encouraged this approach. The U.S. Bureau of Education in 1937 promoted Halloween planning guides for towns to use. Their goal: divert mischief into constructive activities. These haunted houses weren't flashy. They weren't safe by modern standards. But they worked. Kids who might have soaped windows or started fires instead screamed in delight while walking through cardboard tunnels and dead man's halls. And so, haunted houses, now a $300 million industry, were born not from horror movies, but from homemade desperation. In the darkest years of the Depression, America invented one of its most enduring traditions, just to stop the windows from breaking. The DIY Halloween, costumes from flour sacks, treats from ovens. When store shelves were empty, imagination stitched the seams of every ghost, pirate, and pumpkin. In the 1930s America, Halloween didn't come with plastic masks or branded candy bars. There were no pop-up costume stores, no plastic buckets shaped like jack-o'-lanterns. Instead, it was stitched, stirred, and scrounged from whatever a family could find. And often, that wasn't much. Costumes were handmade because they had to be. Flour sacks became ghost robes. Potato sacks turned into scarecrows or hobos. Old work shirts, patched quilts, or even curtains were repurposed into costumes. Children often wore soot-rubbed faces to become tramps or used cardboard cutouts painted black for makeshift bat wings. By 1935, the average American household spent less than $2.50 per year on Halloween, including decorations, costumes, and food. That's about $55 today. For many families, it wasn't a holiday of indulgence. It was a rare chance to escape the weight of hunger and hardship. Decorations were as resourceful as they were eerie. Skeletons were hand-cut from newspapers or cereal boxes. Tin cans were punched with holes and placed over candles to cast ghostly shadows. Pumpkins, when families could afford them, were hollowed and carved with butter knives, then lit by wax stubs. In parts of Appalachia and the Midwest, kids used turnips, or rutabagas, for jack-o'-lanterns, echoing old-world Celtic traditions. Candy? Rare. Sugar was expensive and often reserved for canning fruits or saving for winter. Instead of store-bought confections, kids received popcorn balls, molasses taffy, roasted nuts, or homemade soul cakes, a spiced cookie from English All-Hallowtide rituals. Depression-era cookbooks even offered recipes for mock candy made with vinegar, brown sugar, and gelatin substitutes. In poorer neighborhoods, treats were sometimes as simple as an apple, a slice of bread, or a penny, a coin that could mean a full meal at a soup kitchen. And yet, there was joy. Entire blocks would host apple bobbing contests, ring tosses, and shadow plays projected onto sheets. A hay bale and a scarecrow could become a haunted corner of someone's backyard. Some schools and church basements became gathering spots for mask dances, where the prize was often a single slice of pie. This was Halloween as a testament to ingenuity. In a time when Americans faced 25% unemployment and millions had no electricity, they carved out a night of imagination using rusted scissors and last week's bread. Could you trick or treat during a riot? In 1933, Halloween didn't need costumes to be terrifying, just a matchstick and a city block. By the early 1930s, Halloween had a darker nickname, Black Halloween. For many urban neighborhoods, October 31st wasn't a night of fun. It was a night of riots, vandalism, and chaos. And in some towns, kids weren't trick-or-treating. They were tearing down fences, setting fires, or flipping over outhouses. The worst year was 1933, what newspapers dubbed Black Halloween. That year, the vandalism reached historic proportions. In Chicago, fire departments responded to over 1,000 calls for blazes started by youth gangs. In Philadelphia, Hundreds of windows were smashed, and police arrested dozens of teens carrying sacks of rocks. Des Moines, Iowa, was forced to deploy volunteer patrols across the city to prevent widespread damage to schools and city property. Children, some as young as 8, would sneak through alleyways armed with soot, chalk, eggs, and coal. Coal wasn't for warming the house anymore. It was used to pelt doors. Front porches were rigged with tripwires and greased to make adults slip. Mailbox thefts, paint splashes, tire slashing, and livestock harassment became so severe in rural towns that some town councils considered banning Halloween altogether. And it wasn't just mischief, it was protest. With over 15 million unemployed Americans, widespread poverty, and collapsing trust in institutions, Halloween became a vent. Youths, especially teenagers, left idle and unsupervised, used it to strike back at the world that had failed them. Without food, without futures, they grabbed the only power they could: disruption. But there was a counter-effort. Civic groups, PTA organizations, and churches across the country began staging safe Halloweens in response. Boston's Parkman Playground held its first city-sponsored Halloween event in 1933. In Fargo, North Dakota, a masked dance and taffy pull was hosted by the fire department. Local Lions clubs, Elks lodges, and women's clubs started hosting chaperoned parties in church basements and high school gyms, offering games and storytelling as a way to keep kids off the streets. Police chiefs supported these efforts. In 1934, a national survey found that over 60% of towns with organized Halloween activities saw significant drops in vandalism. In small-town Missouri, one sheriff was quoted saying, "The dance saved every window in town." Still, the divide remained. In some neighborhoods, the kids went to the town hall square dance. In others, they flipped over manure wagons and left trails of flour down Main Street. One New Jersey grocer, remembering Halloween 1932, said, "We didn't hand out candy. We handed out apples and prayed no one threw them back." This was a cultural war between mischief and order, between lawlessness and community care. And in many ways, it was Halloween itself, its rituals, its myths, that became the battleground for restoring trust during America's darkest nights. Step into a 1935 Halloween night. Could you find joy in the dark? It's not about candy. It's about pretending, for one night, that nothing's broken. You're 11 years old. Your coat is borrowed from your cousin, 3 sizes too big. You've patched your homemade mask with flour paste and old newspaper. There's one candle stub in your house, and your mother used it to light the turnip you carved into a jack-o'-lantern. There's no flashlight, no candy bucket, just a scrap of string for bobbing apples and half a cinnamon stick to flavor the night. It's October 31st, 1935, and you're one of nearly 40 million Americans living in poverty. The Great Depression has entered its 6th year. Unemployment hovers around 20%, and over 250,000 children are estimated to be homeless, riding the rails or begging in streets. But tonight, just tonight, you are allowed to laugh. Your day began early. After chores, your mother taught you how to carve a pumpkin, or more likely, a turnip, since pumpkins cost more than your week's worth of sugar rations. You used a butter knife and scooped the flesh to bake into a molasses cake. This was a special treat, made without milk, eggs, or butter, just lard, brown sugar, flour, and vinegar. Depression cake, they called it, sweetened survival. Your older sister stitched your costume from potato sacks and quilt scraps. Your mask was fashioned from a paper feed bag with holes cut for eyes and a bit of chalk for coloring. Nothing store-bought. That would have been an extravagance. In 1935, the average family made just $1,500 a year, and Halloween spending averaged only pennies per child, if anything at all. As night falls, you head down dirt roads with a few friends. Some homes leave apples or homemade popcorn balls on doorsteps. Others give out baked sweet potatoes wrapped in newsprint or even coal lumps. A Depression-era trick disguised as a treat. But not all is quiet fun. A block away, older kids tie string to gate latches and knock over garbage cans. Someone's already painted the school windows with soap. Rumor has it, over in Springfield, Illinois, someone dumped horse manure into the post office doorway last year. And in cities like New York and Cleveland, reports come in of entire rail cars derailed as a Halloween stunt. Still, in the church hall, laughter bubbles up. A teacher runs a snap apple game, suspending apples from string while blindfolded kids try to bite them. In the corner, a woman dressed as a witch reads fortunes with corn kernels and tea leaves. You're handed a warm molasses cookie, cross-spiced, dense, and dry. And it's the best thing you've tasted all month. Meanwhile, across town, at a barn near the woods, a makeshift haunted maze has been assembled with hay bales, old drapes, and shadow puppets made from candlelight. A kid in a devil mask jumps from behind a sheet. Another pretends to be a ghost using talcum powder and a bed sheet. These are the first haunted houses, born from fear, funded by pennies, built by communities desperate to protect their kids from the chaos outside. No plastic skeletons, no fog machines, just creaking boards, eerie candlelight, and the sound of a violin being badly played behind a haystack. By 10 p.m., a constable on foot patrol nods to your group. In cities like Los Angeles and Detroit, police roamed neighborhoods in full force on Halloween night. More than 3,000 officers were deployed across NYC in 1933 to control riots and mischief. But here in your town, it's quiet tonight. Because of the popcorn balls, because of the apple games, because the adults, desperate, tired, and underpaid, didn't cancel Halloween. They just rewrote it. What Halloween taught America about survival. In a decade of soup lines and sorrow, Halloween wasn't canceled. It was reinvented. By the time the 1930s came to a close, Halloween had morphed from a night of unchecked chaos into a ritual of resilience. It had become, quietly and without fanfare, one of the most democratic celebrations in America, open to the rich and poor alike, even when nearly everyone was poor. Throughout the Great Depression, more than 60% of Americans lived below the poverty line. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Soup kitchens served millions. Yet Halloween persisted, not with expensive decorations or factory-wrapped candy, but with turnips carved by hand, molasses cookies from scratch, and games rigged together with twine and sticks. And the shift wasn't just accidental. Cities were forced to intervene. After the so-called Black Halloween of 1933, when Chicago alone reported over $100,000 in property damage, fires, smashed streetcars, slashed tires, civic leaders took action. The Chicago Women's Club organized some of the first public Halloween parties. Schools extended hours for chaperoned dances and hayrides. YMCA halls opened their doors, offering costume contests, judged not by cost, but by creativity. That was the turning point. It wasn't about silencing fun. It was about redirecting it. This wasn't just happening in major cities. In rural Kansas, towns began hosting Halloween frolics in barns and grange halls. In Middletown, Ohio, the Rotary Club started hosting an annual Safe Night, a tradition that continues to this day. Even FDR's Works Progress Administration, WPA, got involved. They commissioned murals and community theater events themed around autumn harvests and ghost tales, part of the New Deal's larger push to boost morale through culture. By 1939, the term trick or treat had entered widespread use in American newspapers, and by the early 1940s, it had settled into national consciousness. But its modern form would never have happened without the chaos of the 30s. Because Halloween survived the Great Depression, it gained its most defining features. DIY costumes, born of necessity, haunted houses, born from a need to distract community celebrations, born to stop violence, treats, born of whatever was in the oven. Even the treats we recognize today owe their evolution to this era. Mars and Hershey both ramped up candy bar production in the late 30s, sensing a growing youth market tied to seasonal events. But before that, the treat might be a penny, a prune, or a spiced cake wrapped in wax paper. And the spirit behind the pranks? It didn't vanish. But it was tamed, turned into bobbing games, into spooky skits, into costume parades judged by the local sheriff. In the 1930s, Halloween wasn't a holiday of consumption. It was a celebration of creativity and control, a one-night reprieve from a decade of despair. And in that, it became something sacred, something adaptable. That's the legacy. Even today, in times of hardship, economic downturns, pandemics, uncertainty, Halloween rises, not because of what it costs, but because of what it offers. Laughter in disguise, magic in a mask, and a night to pretend everything's okay, even if it's not. If you found this journey into Halloween's haunted history fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore more untold stories from America's past. There's always more hidden in the shadows.